Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. And this afternoon, we are going to look at the whole concept of the denaturalization of US citizens. Can US citizens be denaturalized? And there is a story here coming from the USA Today, which suggests that Trump revives push to denaturalize US citizens. So it means, therefore, that Trump can actually deport if he desires, if the court desires, and if the American immigration apparatus decide that they want to or they desire to denaturalize and to deport US citizens. Now, these US citizens were naturalized, and Trump has some conditions, or the immigration laws have some conditions under which they can be deported. Now, it says that it used to be that immigrants who earned US citizenship could only see it taken away if they hid their Nazi past, had ties to terrorists, or lied on their application. So you can be denaturalized under these conditions if you had past in Nazism, or you had ties to terrorists, or lied on your application. That's changed during the Trump presidency, first administration, when he led to a campaign to denaturalize thousands of immigrant US citizens, though it never met its goals. Last week, Trump rebooted the effort, ordering adequate resources be spent to denaturalize some US citizens as part of his border plan to restrict immigration. Now, that is going to be something interesting. Many people thought when we hear about deportation and Trump's plan to deport, people from the United States, it will be largely made up of illegal immigrants, right? Undocumented immigrants, and perhaps those who might have their green cards. But it's being suggested here now that Trump also can deport. Now, when we say Trump, I'm using Trump as they're using it, but we must understand that this is the military-industrial complex. This is the U.S. apparatus, and the U.S. desires this. Now, the USA Today did bring some context and historical foundation into what happens or how that law is going to be effectuated. Talked among the priorities listed in his first day executive orders was a one-line reference to enforcing a section of immigration law under which the government can revoke an immigrant's US citizenship if it was unlawfully procured, right? So he's suggesting that if the US citizenship, sorry about that, was unlawfully procured, that Trump can actually denaturalize a person of that sort of understanding. Now, we have to understand that these laws are very delicate laws. If you read the Patriot Act that George W. Bush promulgated in 2001, you'd understand, was it 2001, 2002, thereabout? You'd understand that this is possible. And even US citizens that were born in the US, if they are dissidents or if they have been described as a terrorist or have terrorist link, they can also be deported to outside of the United States to a place that they don't know. But one of the secret cells, the secret prisons that the US has around the world, including to Guantanamo Bay. We're living in some scary and frightening times, and we've got to get our acts together. Now, the Trump's new directive got little attention amid the flurry of eye-catching orders to launch the president's promised mass deportation. In his first week, the president declared a national border emergency, deployed 1,500 troops to the border, including a combat force, and deputized 1,000 more federal law enforcement officers to arrest immigrants, among other moves. But this quiet back office directive has immigrant advocates worried because of the wide net his administration cast the last time. Now, they always pretend as if one side of the political spectrum is sympathetic, and so the immigration people are concerned, as if perhaps Barack Obama was not the deporter in chief. who had deported thousands, hundreds of thousands of immigrants, right? More than all US presidents have deported combined, right? That is what we have been told. So when we hear them saying these things, we must understand that these are just window dressing when you have the immigration office behaving as if they are sympathetic to immigrants. Since the executive orders have been signed, there's a lot of fear, generally said Gentare Brigade, a New Jersey-based immigration attorney who successfully fought a denaturalization case during the first Trump administration. She has fielding calls from nervous clients, even those who have already become citizens. Right? So even those who are citizens, and this is important for Jamaicans to understand, those who are in the diaspora, living in the United States, and not only Jamaican diaspora, members of the Jamaican diaspora, but members of the Trinidadian diaspora, any diaspora that reside in the United States, once you have been naturalized, once you became a naturalized system, it is possible for you to be denaturalized. And we did cite some circumstances under which that could have happened even in previous years, right? Under people who had Nazi connections and those who, you know, committed some fraud on your document, right? And I think there was another situation there that my mind is not, that's not coming to mind at the moment. Now, we have this where during Trump's first term, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions ordered the investigation of 700,000 naturalized citizens with a goal of bringing some 600 cases to the courts. The denaturalization efforts was part of the administration's zero tolerance campaign, best known for the prosecution of border crossers and family separation. All right, so we did not hear that Jeff Sessions, the then Attorney General rather, you know, that he actually ordered the investigation of over 700,000 naturalized citizens. Did you know that? So that is something for us to take into consideration. We're not living in normal times. So it is not just undocumented people that Trump is going after for deportation. Now, hear what the USA Today is reporting. Trump's initial push to investigate naturalized citizens was an expansion of an initiative that began under President Barack Obama. May I repeat that? Trump's initial push to investigate naturalized citizens was an expansion of an initiative that began under President Barack Hussein Obama. Now, we must understand that this is a continuity of government, the COG in the United States. So when you keep on saying Trump, 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 as many of the papers are all saying, because he's a brand and they're making money and he's also making money from his brand. But the fact of the matter, this is the US empire instituting these surveillance activities. And when you speak about the border being policed, it's not to protect the citizens, it's to militarize, as it were, the border area. And US citizens have also got to be aware, they've got to be alert as to what is happening, because it could be also the evaporation of your rights, of your civil rights. Very important that we understand as we see the empire expanding, we will see that it is going to be implementing some draconic measures and things are going to be very strange. There are going to be some bizarre occurrences, as it were. Now, at the time, the federal government had switched from paper to using digital fingerprints, and Homeland Security officials uncovered hundreds of cases in which naturalized citizens had in fact been previously deported or lied about criminal records that USCIC couldn't see. The Obama administration began a review aiming to denaturalize any citizen with ties to foreign terrorist organizations. Now, that can mean anything, you know. It means, therefore, that if you are a part of an organization that might not be a terrorist organization in your eyes, but the US deems that organization to be a terrorist organization, then they can take legal action against you. And there are some freedom movements that are normal movements in any normal democratic society, that would have been allowed, but they are not going to allow them. For example, if Marcus Garvey was living in our world today, his UNIA would definitely be considered a terrorist organization because of the fact that he was challenging the status quo of the United States. He wanted Black people to be free, and he wanted them to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, and economically independent. Right? So the United States would have branded that organization, the UNIA, as a terrorist organization. Right? So there are some legitimate organizations. For example, when you look at what happened also, I think, if I am correct, that even the Palestinians and their organizations were deemed also to be terrorist organizations because they were being anti-Semites. Right? So there is a blurry line, as it were, between what you are going to call a normal organization versus a terrorist organization, because any organization that dissents, that does not agree with US imperialism, its diktats, its empire, then they can be branded as a terrorist organization, any dissident group, as it were. Something that you have to bear in mind. And a lot of times, according to the Patriot Act, you will not be able to get any representation in court if the US connects you with or accuses you of being affiliated with a terrorist organization. That's the end of your rights. That's practically the end of your rights, because it will take a long fight in court if they even give you a fight, if they even give you that right to represent yourselves in the court. This is something that we have to understand. So it's going to be a very, very hard, I would say, very difficult sojourn for immigrants who have been naturalized. I think that the US is going to be able to denaturalize you if they're suggesting that you might belong to a terrorist organization, even though you might not be. So for those of you who are pro-Palestinians and you might be in groups like those, you have to watch your back. You have to watch your back, because some of these things that you think are ordinary, and in ordinary times, yes, they're ordinary, but we are living in extraordinary, in abnormal times. We're not living in ordinary times. And many of you have gone back to sleep after the pandemic. You think that our society has gone back to normality, but that is not so. The same books are on the law, on the same laws, rather, I say opposite. The same laws that were instituted during the pandemic, right, are still on the books, and they can be implemented at any given moment. Just want you to understand that. Now, there's something here that the papers reported here, the USA Today reported, that is important that we understand. Trump's approach, called for by the Conservative Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, has been far broader. Mark Krikorian, executive director of the right-leaning Center for Immigration Studies, said casting a wider net in search of fraud or misrepresentations makes sense. Now, historically, the United States also denaturalized its citizens. That's naturalized citizens, as it were. Now, the paper here is saying in the red baiting 1950s, the US government used its considerable power to strip citizenship from immigrants it viewed as political enemies, labor leaders, journalists, all right? So journalists can be involved, included in this. So, what I'm doing here is journalistic work too. And if I'm in the, in the States, and the States deem me as disseminating information that they might deem to be anti-American, then they can actually denaturalize any journalist as that they deem to be terrorists, or critics of the government. So you can only just criticizing the government. This happened in 1950s. Labor leaders, journalists, or critics of the government accused of being communists, said Frost. So it means, therefore, that during the 1950s, during the Red Scare and the MacArthur era, what it is here saying that the government often denaturalized citizens. That's naturalized citizens, naturalized US citizens. It was a very targeted, very political Cold War effort. Now listen to what he says. Through the two wars and into the 1950s, some 22,000 immigrants saw their US citizenship revoked. And I think that Marcus Garvey could have been one of them. The Supreme Court put an end to politically driven denaturalization campaigns in 1967, ruling that the government could only revoke an immigrant's citizenship in the case of fraud or willful misrepresentation. Right? In the quarter century before Trump first took office from 1990 to 2017, the US government targeted an average of 11 naturalized citizens per year, according to Frost's research. So this is important. It's an important article, and it's important information for us to study, to understand that Trump's mass deportation executive order does not only have to do with undocumented illegal immigrants. It can also include naturalized immigrants, those who got their green cards and afterwards their citizenship. And so it's important for members of the diaspora, immigrants to the United States, to understand that depending on what organization you're a part of, including some church groups and some other groups that, like the Palestinian, Freedom for Palestine, whatever, that if the United States deems these organizations to be terrorist organizations, that you can be denaturalized. Also, you have to be careful of fraud. So if you know that your paperwork had some fraud in terms of your having become a naturalized citizen, that also can result in your being deported, your being stripped of your citizenship, your US citizenship, and you can be deported back to your country of origin. Okay, hope that you understand that. And I also want to emphasize the point that US citizens born in the US, you've got to be careful too, because if you are a dissident and if the US considers you to be someone who is criticizing the government and affiliating yourselves with what they deem to be terrorist organizations and terrorist, groups, it means, therefore, that you can be deported to a place, one of the secret prisons that the US has around the world. Remember now that after 9/11, there were 2 US citizens who were returning back to the United States. I think one was from Saudi Arabia, was returning from Saudi Arabia, rather. And he was targeted to have been a terrorist and was sent to Guantanamo Bay, and they had to fight because it's almost like they did not want him to get any form of representation, right? There's a word that they call it that's not coming to mind now, in terms of when they deem you to be a terrorist and you cannot represent yourself there, you cannot get an legal defense to defend your cause. Now, we are seeing now an emergence of the beast system rising in the United States of America. America is becoming like a dragon. You can hear the dragon-like tone in her voice, and we've got to be careful. We're not living in normal times. Don't think because you have some citizenship, it means, therefore, I have to just let me not worry because I'm fine, right? All Trump is going after are illegal immigrants. We've got to be careful and make sure that you are keeping abreast of what is happening and you understand, and most importantly, the system, not Trump. Trump is a symptom of the system. You need to look at the root cause, the foundation of this Babylonian system, right? Thank you so much for joining. I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe. Look forward to seeing you in another video.